Welcome to the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. I'm your host, Jacob Cooper, best-selling author of Life After Breath and the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. Today's guest is my friend and colleague and fellow near-death experiencer, Jeffrey Olsen. Jeffrey's going to share his profound near-death experience story, as well as his insights from crossing over and what he experienced, and I know you will be deeply inspired to hear Jeffrey's stories. But for those viewers who are new to my channel, we welcome you with open arms. Please make sure you hit that subscribe button and bell notification icon and share your comments on this incredible dialogue with Jeffrey so we continue to grow the community and build up our own wisdom and cohesion. So without further ado, I welcome Jeffrey Olsen on the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. Jeffrey Olsen, my man, thank you so much for coming to the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. It's just a true pleasure seeing you. I haven't seen you probably in a couple of years since we last saw each other. I think was it in Pennsylvania,
Yeah.
around Philly area for the IONS conference when we met. But obviously, I'm a massive fan of yours, and I love your incredible story. But for viewers who have never heard Jeffrey Olsen, can you tell us a little bit about your background and, what you're doing these days, because you're influencing people around the world with your profound stories. So maybe you could give us some insight into, that story and that segue that propelled the man that I see today.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jacob. And it is an honor to be with you and to be communicating again. My background, I'm a pretty regular guy. I grew up on a little family farm in the mountains of Utah. I've actually moved back to Wasatch County, and I live there now, and we've got horses and cows and sheep, and I'm back on the farm. Oddly enough, growing up, I wanted to get off the farm, and I had a creative mind. I wanted to be an artist. And it's funny how, I graduated from high school and thought, I've got to get out of this one-horse town. And then I think my whole, from about 40 on, it's like, I got to get back to that one-horse town. How am I going to do that? But grew up in a rough and tumble family of boys. My parents split up when I was young. And, I spent time with my mother, who I love and adore, and then ended up with my father on the family farm. It was like bonanza. It was single dad, 3 sons, and we ran beef cows. We had a dairy farm and all that goes with that. So I learned hard work, but in, moving away from that and getting an education in creative direction, art direction, marketing, messaging, all that stuff. It was a step away from the farm, but I think in the end, it's all based on connection and storytelling. I'm still a creative director currently. I have a full-time job. I don't speak or write or do any of that, except squeezing it in when it makes sense. Currently, I'm the creative director at a little television network, BYU TV, which is free. You can go to your app store and download the app for free, but we're doing value-based content for families. It's feel-good TV for families. It's not necessarily religious. It is value-based and provides an alternative to all that's out there to watch. So that's me in a nutshell, I suppose.
Yeah, well, I love the BYU connection, being a football guy myself, and I know my Jets drafted Zach Wilson. We wish him the best, obviously, if he's with us or in the future. It's a big jump from the NFL, but you've had studs like Steve Young, I think, go through those doors, and a couple other ball players, BYU. So I know you're very involved, and that's a big part of your community. Before we get into, I'm sorry.
Oh, it is. I was going to say, I'm an Aggie through and through. I played Division I football for Utah State and played against Steve Young.
You did? So, oh my God!
It's kind of a funny thing that I'm at BYU, but I'm an Aggie through and through, and the rivalry never dies. But yeah, they pumped out some good athletes, and my favorite is probably this Walker kid with the 49ers, inside linebacker, incredible athlete, and I love watching him play when you go to BYU. But hey, you got Bobby Wagner from Utah State, and he's like the iconic iconic linebacker. So there you go.
Yeah. I mean, I never knew that about you. What position did you play in
I was
football?
I was an inside linebacker, weak
Wow.
side. They called me a whip linebacker. You're basically
Right.
a strong safety that's big enough to take on the run when
Right.
necessary. There was a lot of passing going on back in
Mm,
the day, and it was a lot of sets where you would actually, you would be out on a flanker of some kind rather than inside. But there was plenty of times, those big 300-pound guards were coming after you, and that's, you know,
right.
it's odd that I went through all that and never had a serious injury, and then
Yes.
had the accident, which basically broke me into pieces.
Yes, which, is a profound story, and we'll get into that in a moment. But Jeffrey, I just had a question because it just out of curiosity, something that I've noticed where it seems like a lot of people that I know who are fellow near-death experiencers, it almost seems like the life that they're living now or what they lived before prepared them. I notice a lot of people with marketing backgrounds or media backgrounds, and it almost seems like God or spirit like prepared us in a way to get the story out with our given background. Do you feel like some of the things that you did prior to your NDE helped you along the way to get it out? Or I'm just throwing darts on the board, but I don't know if
No,
that
I
is
think
in
that's a
parallel.
profound thing, because there seems to be a divine order to our lives.
Mm,
And, I was on the team. I mean, let's be honest. I was not a
mm,
magnificent football player.
mm,
I sat the bench and played special teams
right.
and played behind the great Al Smith, who I think
Mm,
is about a 5-time Pro Bowler.
wow.
Yeah, he was in Houston back in the day,
Mm,
but yeah, that wasn't really what I was doing. I was lucky enough to be on the team, and that's really it. My education, where it came down to communicating, how do
mhm,
you communicate? And even in my career, I was, working for big corporations like 3M and
mm,
Intel, and sometimes it was complex messages
mm,
that you'd have to digest down into a bite size, piece of
mm,
communication that somebody could digest and get the message from. And I suppose if I were to look back over it with my gray hair now, the near death experience, the mystical, the out
mm,
of body experiences are very complex in many ways.
mm.
And perhaps, my education, my career allows someone like me to distill that down, where how can I present that, or how can I communicate that in a way where it's
Mm.
digestible, where people can at least get the essence of what perhaps happened to me, and by getting the essence of that, placing themselves in the world in a different place that has more meaning.
Yes, and do you feel it? I've noticed with some near-death experiencers, it took them a bit of time to process, and your experience was profound, and I know you could probably tell a lot more just because the complexity of it. And so maybe you could share like a little, not a little, but just kind of what happened on that day.
Happy to.
Because to me, I've heard you share it, and I look at every near-death experience as the same, but your story sticks out in a very unique, profound way, and it really has penetrated the hearts and minds of so many, and it is profound. So, if you could share us what happened on that day.
No, I'm happy to. And just to affirm, yeah, it took me almost 10 years before I ever spoke
Mm,
about it publicly. It does take time to process something like this. And it's been 26 years since it happened.
wow. Mm,
Uh, but it's like it was yesterday. And what happened is it was an automobile accident.
mm,
More important than my education or being on the football team or any of those things was, in college, I fell madly head over heels in love. And there was some mystical energy around that. I mean, my wife, Tamara, walked in the room. I didn't even know her name, but it was like a lightning bolt hit me and
mm,
said, there she is. And the miracles probably that I introduced myself and started a conversation. I was quite shy, actually.
mm,
But we had a friendship, a courtship, eventually a marriage. We had our first child about 3 years into the marriage. and actually struggled to get a second child here. We went through in vitro
Wow.
process to get our second son. But 10 years into our marriage, there we were, 2 healthy boys, family complete. Tamara was a school teacher. She taught high school. She loved it. She loved her students. I was, neck deep into marketing, and I just started my own advertising agency with some very talented partners. And life had seemed to really fall into place. And it was Easter. It was the springtime that we went on a family vacation from the northern part of Utah down to the southern part of Utah to see the Red Rocks and specifically to visit Tamara's family. Easter was fantastic. We spent the holiday. We honored all the family traditions. And it was that Monday morning that we were coming home that we had the accident. And it was... gosh, it's still hard sometimes to recount it. We had told everyone goodbye. I had gotten out on the interstate. We were driving. Tamara had actually reclined her seat back and she was sound asleep. And ironically, still holding my hand. And I'll never forget that. Like, we're 10 years into the marriage and she's still holding my hand. She was holding my hand and I'm driving with the other hand. Our boys were in the back. Griffin, my youngest, who was just a toddler at the time, he had fallen sound asleep in his car seat, and Spencer, my 7-year-old, was playing with little action figures behind me. And that was kind of the setting. I'd set the cruise control to 75, and there was reports of crosswinds. There was reports of a red pickup truck driving erratically on the interstate. Jacob, maybe the hardest part of the story is I believe I may have dozed off at the wheel. And there's no excuse or reason, but, I think about these fathers and mothers, those that are providing. I mean, the 12, 14, 16-hour days. And, it can be a grind. And I was certainly in the middle of that. But I believe I may have dozed off. And in doing so, just swerved to the left, overcorrected, or swerved to the right, overcorrected to the left, and lost control of the car. It began to roll not off the road, but down the road, down the concrete at that 75 mile per hour speed. And it was a horrific crash. I blacked out for most of that. I knew that we were crashing, but I blacked out. It wasn't until the car came to a complete stop that I was fully conscious. And the first thing I heard was my 7-year-old son crying hysterically in the back seat. Wow. And I thought, wow, I've got to get to my boy. I've got to get to my boy. And that's when I realized that I could not move. I was pinned either to the floorboard or the seat. I couldn't tell. There was all the broken glass, the smell of gasoline. I was unaware of my injuries. I was in pain. I was struggling to breathe. What had actually happened is both of my legs had been crushed. Wow. The left leg, eventually, a few days later, was amputated above the knee. The right leg was completely shattered. I've got 6 pins and a plate holding my right leg together now. My back was broken in 2 places, but did not damage the spinal column. I think it was L4 and L5 were cracked. My rib cage was damaged. My lungs were collapsing. My right arm had almost been completely torn off. And then the seat belt had cut through and ruptured all my intestines. Wow. So I was in rough shape. Was not aware of the injuries. I just knew, it was the panic, the adrenaline. I've got to get to my boy, who I heard crying. In that moment, I realized no one else was crying. That's when I knew that Tamara, my wife, and my toddler son Griffin had passed. I was aware of it. I don't talk about what I saw or what that was like, but just know it was the deepest, darkest place a man could ever be in. Here I was with a hysterical 7-year-old that I couldn't get to. I'm pinned. I know that half the family is passed. And I was driving the car. The regret, the guilt, like, can't I get those 3 seconds back? What happened? And I set that up because it was in that moment that I felt light come. I literally felt light, as if light rushed to me, as if light surrounded me, as if light was comforting me in this horrible, horrible moment. And it felt like I rose above the accident scene. And I was confused because suddenly I was okay. The pain was gone. I could breathe. I was literally thinking, how can I be okay? And then Tamara, who I knew was deceased at the scene, suddenly she's there in this light with me.
Wow.
And she's gorgeous. She's radiant. She's very much alive. No injuries, nothing like the accident scene. She was beautiful. And yet she began to communicate to me, you can't stay. You can't be here. You got to go. You got to go back. And she was upset about this. You've got to go back. And we literally had a conversation about if I stayed with her, our son, Spencer, would be orphaned. And we made a choice that I would come back. Coming back was interesting because I didn't have to figure out how to come back. I mean, we have no idea how powerful our thoughts are. It was that intention. Okay, I'm going back. I said a very profound goodbye. And then it's like I was just, just whisked to a busy level 1 trauma ER hospital setting. I have no concept of time, in this light. I later found out people arrived at the scene. A lot of things happened. They had to extricate me from the car. I was rushed to a local hospital where they couldn't deal with my injuries, and I was then airlifted, life flighted to a level 1 trauma center. I had no knowledge of that. I knew I'd wrecked the car. I knew half the family had passed. I knew I had said this profound goodbye, and here I was wandering about the hospital, seeing the doctors, the patients, the nurses, but seeing them. I call it a oneness. I was connected to everybody. I knew them, and yet I saw the magnificence of their soul until I came to a body or a man I didn't feel anything from, which I thought was strange given the profound connectedness I was feeling with everyone around me. And that's when I stepped forward to look. And it was only in that moment that I realized, wow, that's me. I mean, that's kind of when the realization hit that, wow, I'm out of the body. This is a soul. I'm me. I'm having this connected experience, but there's my body. There's the skin suit. And wow, there was a reverence for that too, a huge reverence. Like, wow, I never realized the miracle of the body. I didn't have to remind my lungs to breathe or tell my heart to beat or teach my eyes how to see. I saw this profound beauty and miracle in the body. And yet I knew mine was broken, but I also knew I had to get back in. And once again, making that choice, that clear intention of I'm going back in. Then boom, back in the body, back to pain, the grief, the guilt, the trauma. The hospital was so heavy. It was so difficult. It was difficult to be in the body, in the grief, in the trauma. And I learned a lot. I was in the hospital for over 5 months. Wow. 18 surgeries in all, and it was quite an experience. I mean, the infections were horrible. I threw pulmonary emboli, the blood clots that lodge in your lungs. I mean, everything that could go wrong probably went wrong.
Wow.
But we had made a deal. I had chosen to come back, and so here I am.
Complete miracle in many ways, and I'm sure you get this a lot, but there's no words to describe the beauty of what you experienced, while at the same time it's a double-edged sword. I'm sure you experienced where the polarity of it. I have to ask you a question because I'm trying to help out clients this, but you mentioned trauma, which
Yeah.
is often a term that isn't spoken of, I feel, enough with near-death experiences. I feel there's a focus on the euphoric experience that that we experienced, but the trauma that you had. How did you find ways to walk forward on this? Like, what was your secret sauce, if you will? Because I think you experienced, one of the abysses of life physically, emotionally, psychologically, and you're here today in front of me. What were some of the things that you were able to do to foster resilience and
Wow.
process this trauma?
Jacob, I that's a great question.
Mm.
I don't know. I mean, I had made this commitment to survive and raise my son. That was huge. My family was incredible. Friends and coworkers were incredible. I certainly had angelic support through it.
Mm.
I think at the end of my hospital stay was an experience, call it out of body, near death. I certainly wasn't pronounced dead. This was at the end of the hospital stay when I was only a few weeks from going home. But I was in my hospital bed sleeping one night, and I'd finally healed enough I could lay on my side. They had stabilized all the abdominal injuries, and they'd put a colostomy bag in and stitched me up. And I had laid so long on my back, I'd rubbed all the hair off the back of my head. I was bald. I was bald on the back of my head. But in this stage, I was able to lay on my side. And it felt so good to finally, that's how I naturally sleep. And I fell into a deep sleep, and I felt that light come again, just like at the accident. I mean, I was grieving so miserably. I mean, Jacob, the physical injuries were nothing compared to the emotional grief.
Psychological, yeah.
Yeah, of loss, of death, of having half the family go, and worrying about my little 7-year-old son and how is this going to look. And I didn't sleep much in the hospital, but this night I was sleeping. I felt the light come. Again, it felt like I was rising above the hospital bed, but this time the light dispensed, and I was in the most incredible, beautiful place, and I was whole. I had both legs and both feet, and I was whole, and there was such joy. I began to run. I began to run, and I was like, wow. People say heaven, the other side, the spirit world. There's all kinds of terms. The only term that comes close to what I was experiencing is I was home. I was home. It was so familiar. It was so welcoming. And yet it was so physical. The experience was so physical. I could feel the energy of the ground beneath my feet. I could feel the intelligence in my calves and in my thighs. And I'm racing about joyfully thinking I'm home and I'm whole. And then I got the message I wasn't there to stay. And in that moment, this corridor appeared to my left, and I knew intuitively I'm to go that way. I'm to go down that way, which I did. And as I made my way down, there was a crib, a baby crib at the end of it. Now, Griffin, when he passed, was only 14 months old. He was still sleeping in a crib. So as a father, I'm intrigued, and I go to this crib. When I look in it, there's my little boy, and he's sleeping as beautifully as ever. And I picked him up. I swept him up. I don't know if you've ever picked up a sleeping child.
I could imagine. Yeah. It's a beautiful, pure feeling, I'm sure.
And anybody who's done it, there's a weight, there's a heat. Everything. Here's what was so bizarre. Everything was so cosmic and ethereal, and yet, for my experience, it was so physical. I could feel him. I could feel the weight and heat of his body. I could feel him breathing. I could feel his breath on my neck, and I even leaned over and smelled his hair. And it was just, this is my boy. I could smell him.
It was very real.
Yeah. It was very real. It was so, in fact, that was what's real. This is the crazy, ethereal, foggy dream. Everything there was so crystal clear, real. And I began to weep, as I held my child and thinking, wow, I really get to hold him one more time. And this presence was behind me as I was holding him, and it kept coming closer and closer. And it was this cosmic, overwhelming, powerful, wise presence coming closer and closer as I'm weeping and holding my son. And, I grew up in a Christian home, and what I'm thinking is, that's God. That's God, and I'm in so much trouble. My little boy's here because I lost control of the car. I crashed, and because of that, I cut his life so short, and the guilt was rising up, and this presence is coming closer and closer. And as it came very close, I had the thought, oh, I hope I can be forgiven. And in that thought, and this almost felt physical too, it's like these divine arms just wrapped around and held me and my son. And that's when the whole lid just came off. I mean, the download. It's almost as if we became one. I became connected to the divine and all there is. And I saw my life. I've learned it's called a life review. I'm looking at my life and I'm judging it. I'm saying, well, that was a mistake. Didn't mean to do that. And yet the being that held me, I call God, said, yeah, but what did you learn? What did you learn? And there was things I thought, well, that was wrong, and I did it anyway. And what I was told is, that's your judgment of it, not mine. You are so loved. And it was profound, because I'm holding my child, and yet we're in the arms of God. And I'm looking at my little boy, and yes, he's beloved, and he's perfect, and he's divine, and he's all of those things. And yet here we were in the arms of the divine. And it was a personal experience that I was beloved, that I was like that it was even multiplied about the way I felt about my own child. But although it was personal, I knew it went out to every living soul. Like, wow, there's so much love.
Wow.
So much love. And there was communication. God was communicating, and it wasn't necessarily with words. There was some words, but it was just, I was told that I had the opportunity to exercise my will. Now, given my conservative Christian upbringing, I'm like, oh no, it's your will be done. I know, I know that.
Right.
And yet, I sometimes hesitate to share this. What was communicated is, my will is your will. That's how much you're loved. In fact, my will has always been that you have free will. That's how much you're held by the love of the whole universe. And I was told I could be mad at God my whole life because this was allowed to happen. Or I could beat myself up for the rest of my life because I was driving the car. And I still did plenty of that, to be honest. But I was given a different choice. I was told, you can exercise your will and you can give your son to me. You can hand him over. You can let go and trust, and therefore exercise your will and not feel so put upon. And in all that love and all that beauty and all that peace, I kissed my little boy, and I gave him back. I handed him over, and and it's like the whole universe just, there aren't words. But then I, came to myself back in the hospital bed with the amputation and all the injuries and the colostomy, and I had a little different insight. I still grieved as miserably as anyone grieves. But that was a profound experience that changed me in many ways. It confused me in many ways. Wow, there's that much love? You mean no matter what I do, I'm simply here to learn?
Right.
And I'm held by the entire universe in love? It's a lot to digest. It's a lot to swallow.
It's profound. I mean, everything you're saying is, but I think it seems to me like once you surrender that possessiveness of this pain, or even your child, that all is God, all comes from God, is when there was this opening. And I know when I had my near death experience and I let go of my human breath and I surrendered to this breath of eternity, was when everything opened up. And I just wanted your thoughts on surrender, because that seems to be a saving grace of many near death experiencers' lives. And it seems like yours too was that just surrender to a greater force and just trusting that higher intelligence over our own judgments or fears or doubts. And it seemed like that was a spa for your soul, and very healing, it seems.
Yeah. Jacob, you're so good. Thank you. I mean, yeah, surrender. I mean, we started off talking about football, combat. I mean, it's this battle, this competition.
Yin and the yang, right? Yin and the
Yeah,
yang. Yeah.
yes. And yet to surrender. I've come to the conclusion at this point in my life that the most powerful thing a warrior can do is to surrender,
Mm.
to give in to the greater power, to give in to a higher cause, to let go of judgments, comparisons, expectations, and to surrender to love. Surrender to love and to the divine in such a way to realize we are loved. And that is love. It's all love. Even the challenges, even those things in our life, which I've been through many and still continue to experience, where you say, why me? And yet, because you're loved that much, because your soul wants to expand that far, because you are not a human, you're an eternal soul having a human experience, and this is part of the experience. This is why you came. I mean, my upbringing, and I still, I am a fan of who I call the master, this fellow we refer to as Jesus, Yahshua.
A nice Jewish boy from Israel, and a
Boy
very
from Israel,
a
yes.
progressive reform rabbi, so
That's
yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And even when he apparently was being hauled away to be crucified, he said, "For this cause came I into the world."
Wow.
And no matter what belief system you are, or where one may reside, it's like, wow, I can say that. Well, for this cause came I into the world, to experience that, to whatever it is, betrayal, pain, sorrow, joy, love, peace. Well, that's why I came, is to experience it. And I love how you put that, the young Jewish rabbi.
That's what he was to a T. I think there's a misconception on it, and certainly growing up Jewish, there was a deal of stigma to it. But I think when you boil it down, you really have to look at what he stood for, what he was, which was love, forgiveness. Even at the crucifix, Father, forgive them, for they not know what they have done. I mean, just
Yeah.
whether you agree with it or not, you have to respect what he stood for.
Well, that's just it. This whole experience put religion, belief systems into a tailspin for me. I'm like, wow, this is not what I thought it was in Sunday school. I mean, I was taught that life is a test. They're keeping score. And what I learned in the arms of the divine is it's not a test, it's a gift. And we're simply here to learn. And there's things that work or don't work in our lives. And yet, what a beautiful thing. I as I contemplated this after the near-death experience, and for years I contemplated, it took a while to process it, as I say.
Right.
I had a dream one night, and this wasn't an out-of-body experience. This wasn't a near-death experience. It was one of those dreams that you dream and you wake up and you remember every detail.
Very clear dream. Yeah.
Yeah, very clear dream. And in the dream, I was shown three people. The first was Gandhi, who I knew a little bit about from school, but I saw Gandhi, a Hindu man. That was his belief system, but I saw how he lived. I saw how he loved. I saw his commitment to his people and peace. And I experienced in the dream how he felt about his commitment, about his beliefs, about his religion, if you will. And then the second person I saw in the dream was Mother Teresa,
Wow.
a Christian, a Catholic nun. And I felt her love, her devotion, all different beliefs than my own, perhaps, but I saw what that meant to them personally. And the third person I experienced in the dream, and some Christians have criticized me for this, I saw Jesus, the Jewish rabbi. I experienced his Jewishness. I experienced his devotion, Ram Kippur, to the Passover, to the Day of Atonement, to these things. I experienced him as a Jewish rabbi, but what it meant to him personally. And yet the culmination of this dream in the end, and I'll call it the voice of God, said, here's 3 different religions, Hindu, Christian, Jewish. It wasn't their religion that made them powerful. It wasn't their beliefs. They were each unique, but it was their devotion to love. It was their connection to the divine. It was the essence of who and how they walked this journey called life that made them beautiful and powerful and knowing, if you will. I just had to share that, and
I love that, because Jesus was not a Christian. Muhammad was not a Muslim. Those were the constructs made after their lives, but really what they stood for was all the same things, just different cultures and styles of expressing the same principles of love, of not being on this earth, but not of this earth, if that makes sense. Just connected to something higher. So my question for you, Jeff, and I know you mentioned there was some incongruency with the world that you saw or grew up in with the world of the NDE, which is quite common for near-death experiencers. How did you find ways to make sense of the two? Were they always at odds, or was there a way for the two to find emergence with your prior spiritual or religious beliefs and your experience in your near-death experience?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jacob. I found that I had to learn to let go of those things that didn't resonate as true to me. I learned to embrace those things that I had experienced as truth. In other words, that I and you, we are eternal. We're eternal beings. I also found a place to operate from love, that it doesn't matter what someone believes. That's the funny thing. There's so much segregation, division. Around religion, politics, race, gender. What? We just love as the human being to pick a team and cheer for a side, or to divide ourselves based on who looks or acts or believes or sees things like we do. But I think what shifted is I realized we have far more in common as the manifestations of the divine than we ever will as individuals with different beliefs and different cultures and different, genders and different races. And I found a commonality where I choose to look past it. And perhaps if we did, we could lock arms as humanity and move forward in love. And we may literally create heaven on earth. We wouldn't be at war. We wouldn't be at odds. We wouldn't be playing this right-wrong game with each other. We could literally embrace our uniqueness and might find some real commonality that we didn't realize existed.
It's amazing how information about God or spirituality informs our behavior, and how there's such a big correlation with what we think God is and how that influences behaviors. And it seems like religion, it's almost like a monopolization of God and a war for God. Instead of finding God in each other, we try to just build this Tower of Babel over each other and divide and conquer. And that is what the total antithesis of what God is. So when people listen to your stories and your transformation, what you saw directly, my hope is there could be a reframe of the information that there may be were taught that what they could do in that leap of faith to really have a different context and viewpoint on all that is and ever was, and which is hard for a lot of people in any walk of life. But that's how we evolve. That's how we change, is by letting go of something that is served us to a certain point to a new awareness. Does your awareness of the divine stop in your NDE, or do you feel each and every day is a unique way to better understand God?
Each and every day, and it expands. I mean, now, I guess I used to feel like, well, God is out there somewhere. And what has shifted or transformed or progressed or evolved within me is, wow, God is everywhere. I mean, our beloved Jewish rabbi, consider the lilies of the field, how they grow.
Mm.
They don't spin and toil. Consider the birds of the air, how they fly. I mean, these truths were very evident. And I guess that's how I'm looking at it now. Wow, God is in the snowstorm and in the snowflake. And wow, he's in, the homeless guy on the corner and the king of, some country. I think the most challenging thing for me is to look in the mirror and say, where's God in me? Where's my divine part? And again, our beloved brother,
JC, yeah.
the Jewish rabbi, Yahshua, love your neighbor as you love yourself. And that self-love is so key. I mean, but now I see the divine in everything. Even in a rock, it's like, wow, look at everything that went into that rock. And does that rock have a soul? I believe it might. I mean, I in the area I live, there's many indigenous, native, American people, and boy, their beliefs are beautiful about every living thing and our connection to all of it, and that all of it is divine, that
Wow.
we are part of it, and it's part of us.
Isn't it amazing how we could live in one planet in one lifetime? In a different phases of our life, that planet could feel like a totally different universe. Same planet, same land. But from what you're saying, with just that different perspective, the God lens, whatever you want to call it, beauty seeking, we're able to see a totally different world. Now, you've obviously had this incredible transformation of tragedy, to a healing on a macro level. Right now in the world, there's a lot of pain the last couple of years with COVID and the wars in the Middle East and the Ukraine. There's a lot of pain, uncertainty, tragedy experienced. How do you feel your near-death experience, or the near-death experience in general, could speak to people from a macro, spiritual level, to a micro, or micro to macro? How could we speak to this from an NDE? What is the parallels with what we're going through on a macro level with an NDE, would you say?
Yeah, that's an interesting question as well. And I don't have all the answers.
Mm.
I'm wondering if it is a little bit of an undoing.
Mm.
When you plant a bulb, you go out in the fall and you put a bulb in the ground, and then in the spring it blossoms into something quite beautiful. That bulb has to literally come apart. It literally turns inside out to manifest that beauty. Wow. Is that what happened? Is that what is happening? Are we literally, coming apart and turning inside out, that something far more beautiful might manifest? Or are we just making choices that are interesting and that challenge us and that continue to keep us in this spin of us and them rather than we? I don't have the answer.
Yeah,
We could pontificate on it, but I don't know.
It's challenging. Well, I think a lot of muck is coming to the surface, and certainly people have an option to align or disalign with what is being broadcasted. But I think your experience showcases that it is possible to heal from tragedy and trauma, and I hope that more people could start to tune in to something greater inside themselves that will transcend that piece. You mentioned it took you some time to forgive yourself, and I certainly see a lot of clients of mine that go through this, and this could last an entire lifetime, and it has a residual effect on one's mental health. My question for you is, what does forgiveness mean, and why and how do we forgive?
You ask such good questions. To forgive.
Yeah.
Boy, to give is before. To give beforehand, to forgive,
Mm,
to let go,
mm,
to come to peace with,
mm,
to embrace as.
mm,
Forgiveness could mean so many different things.
mm,
And for me, it's a bit of acceptance and realizing I'm only here to learn. I learn by my experiences.
mm,
Even others' actions will cause me experiences. And again, I get to choose.
mm.
I get to choose. And if maybe that's the only cosmic law is we get to choose. We have free will and choice. And we as humanity and as individuals will choose what works and forgive
Mm,
that doesn't, to give it as before and to let it go
mm.
and be at peace with it.
It seems also that it's symmetrical to the divine. You know, the divine, from what you experienced, was about forgiveness and unconditional love. And I think for us, we're experiencing that part of divinity when we were able to forgive ourselves too. You know, in that outlook.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, in the arms of the divine, there was no judgments
Mm,
or comparisons. It was simply love. What are you learning? What did the experience provide? And yet, it's we can sit and say that. I've even heard people say, "Well, life's an illusion. It's just a school." No, it's very real. And
mm,
sometimes the actions of others can be so devastating.
mm,
Um, it's real when you're here, being human, and experiencing all of that. Uh,
two things could be true at the same time, where that's real and this could also be real. It doesn't have to be one or the other.
I
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
it doesn't. It
Mm,
doesn't. And yet, if it all expands the soul, if it's about expansion,
mm,
or if it's about empathy,
mm,
true compassion, maybe a deeper ability to love,
mm,
perhaps it all serves the expansion of our souls, even when it's devastating and hurts.
mm. Love it. Now, Jeff, my last question is, it seemed like for you when you experienced the other side, that seemed like home to you. It
Yeah.
was it was a familiarity, and there are many people who indirectly or directly feel a sense of homesickness.
Mm.
How do you personally connect to that feeling? Is that something that slipped away from you, or do you have a practice that allows you to return back to a similar stasis or feeling of belonging? Is there practices that you do to kind of connect to it? Because there seems to be a lot of people who feel homesick after these experiences, and I'm wondering if there's anything that you try to do, to have that similar realization on a
Yeah.
basis.
Yeah, I mean, and Jacob, I go through it. I've made so many mistakes in life. I go through that homesickness. I go through that feeling disconnected. I haven't figured it all out. But one thing I do, I actually call it ABC, always be connected. If I can take 10 minutes and just be still,
Mm,
and I literally push the energy down into my heart, into my, I get out of the head and push it
mm,
down in the heart and literally envision like a cord connecting to that light, to the
mm,
divine, and remembering, putting all the pieces back together to, okay, who am I? What am I? And why am I here? And experiencing that way.
mm.
There's one more thing too that I found very useful, and that is just getting out of my way.
Wow.
In other words, you could do this, and again, I don't care what belief system or what that is. you could sit in a quiet place and simply ask, either out loud or just in your mind, what can I do for someone else today? Outward focused. And I swear every time you'll have a little idea, someone's face or image will come into your mind. And it might be as simple as, oh, I got to call mom. Yeah, I haven't talked to mom. And, I mean, it can be the simple thing, but when you act upon it, to me, that seems to keep me connected in, okay, I have guides. There is a purpose. And it might be to smile at that stranger on the street, because that might be the most profound thing and the most powerful thing you do in a day.
The beauty of service, and we just don't know the ripple effect of, like you said, that smile. And now we don't have to wear masks, so we can actually show our teeth and everything.
Yeah.
But I remember once I was complaining on Thanksgiving, and my mother took me to the town over. We went to the soup kitchen, local soup kitchen, and we just helped these people out. And it just reminded me, like, sometimes we could get so miserable in our own way, but when we serve others, it radiates a sense of joy, of happiness. But you call that the God realization, whatever that is. We're here to, have that ripple effect, and not so much be focused on our problems, but to really find solutions in the world and have that ripple effect. So that's beautiful. Yeah.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah. Well, Jeffrey, last question before you go to your books. You've had a lot of takeaways, I'm sure, from your near-death experience, and every day, I'm sure, is a different way to look at it. If there's like one or two things that stick out to you the most, because I know my viewers really could benefit from like hearing, but is there one thing that, a sentence or two that really sticks out to you about your NDE that you've learned and incorporated that you find to be, I'm sure it's all powerful, but that kind of sticks with you the most?
Yeah. Two things. It's a choice. We can choose joy or choose misery. And sometimes I choose misery, I'll be honest, but it's a choice. The other is, wow, if there's a way for me to operate from love and gratitude, if I can be thankful, it seems to be the balm that heals all things. And gratitude manifests love.
Wow. Love gratitude. There's a saying by Zig Ziglar that says, gratitude, not aptitude, will define your altitude. And so not your talent, but your ability to be grateful will define how high you go.
Wow.
And how high you feel. Well, that's beautiful. But Jeffrey, I loved your book, Knowing, and I read it myself, and I know we share the same editor, and it's very well written. But for your other books, maybe could you give a brief description of where they could find some of your other profound best-selling books, and tell us a little bit about your latest book. I think you wrote with your son, Spencer. Is that correct?
Yeah,
so
that's correct.
You always have something down the pipeline. So just give us a little bit of insight, because your books are just gifts. And I know so many people that I know just love you and love your books. So just tell us a little bit more about your that part of you.
Well, the books, I never had any intention of being an author. I'll be honest. I mean, gosh, I didn't even talk about this. And the first time, well, it may have been the second time I even mentioned it publicly. There was a group getting together, and it was an IANS group, a local International Association for Near-Death Studies. And I reluctantly shared my experience there. And there was a publisher in the audience that came up, and suddenly I had a book contract. He said, "You're going to write a book." And I said, "No, I'm not." This was a Friday night, and Monday there was a contract in my email, and I really had to contemplate that. But the first book came out, which I wrote. It was called I Knew Their Hearts. You can still get I Knew Their Hearts on Amazon. And that was the first book. And I thought, what the heck, my mom will buy a copy. I had no idea, but it hit number 3 in the category on Amazon. And suddenly I was whisked into a whole different lifestyle. And then the publisher wanted a second book, which was the healing and follow-up to all of this. And that was called Beyond Mile Marker 80, which is also available. But knowing the book you held up, that is a compilation of the two. So if you really want the full story, Knowing is the book to get. It has extended chapters, deeper insights, but it actually contains I Knew Their Hearts and Beyond Mile Marker 80. And the latest book is a compilation with my son. I talked about this little 7-year-old at the time of the accident. He didn't have a near-death experience. He didn't have an out-of-body experience. He didn't have a profound dream or visitation. He had to navigate this as a child. He had lost everything I had lost. He had lost his mother. He had lost his brother. He had lost his father in many ways, and he was 7. And as Spencer grew up and had really struggled with, gosh, Dad, you tell of this out of body, this near-death experience of these angelic dreams. I got nothing. I got nothing. And yet as he took his own personal journey, he did find himself. In fact, he said to me one day, as he was he must have been in his 20s, maybe mid-20s. He was working with kids in after-school rock and roll programs that were troubled, and he was in Big Brothers Big Sisters. And he said, Dad, maybe I'm God's hands. If I've begged and done this thing you call prayer and I got no, he said, maybe I'm God's light and love. Maybe I can show up. And he's become the most compassionate man. And the book we wrote was based on that 7-year-old innocence. The book's titled, Where Are You? It's also available on Amazon, but, we illustrated it, we wrote it, and it is his journey of looking for his mom and his little brother. Where are you? I've looked in the kitchen. I've looked in the garden. I've looked in the sky. I've looked at the star. Where are you? You're not here. It's the heartbreak of that. And yet this realization that, wow, I'm here and I'm alive and you're within me and I'm connected to you. And therefore you're in everything. Now, we wrote it as a children's book. Some guys golf, some guys fish, some guys fix cars. We wrote a book together. We thought it was a children's book. We've found that everyone's embraced it. Anybody who misses someone has embraced it, but there seems to be an undercurrent, deeper message to the book. And for me, it's this. We've all cried out for the divine. Where are you? Even our Jewish rabbi, my God, why have you forsaken me now?
Right.
Wow, maybe the divine is within us. And maybe because we're here and we're divine and we're experiencing things, everything's divine and we're connected to all of it. But get the book. Where Are You? It's on Amazon. It's a children's book. You can read it in 10 minutes, but it has a pretty powerful message. And I attribute that to my son, Spencer, who had a much different journey than mine, but he came out better than I am. And that's a big deal.
Jeffrey, it's an honor to call you a friend, a colleague. I see you as a brilliant luminary here that has impacted so many lives, that I know God has chosen the perfect one with you. You're a man of service, devotion, sincerity, integrity. You're humble. And I am just honored to have you here in front of me, to know you. And I know so many people have been moved by your brilliant transformation, your story, and the path that you continue to pave each and every day. You're a true earth angel in my eyes, and that's how I see you.
I thank you. And yet you only see in others what exists within yourself, my friend. And in the end, I'm just me. I'm just me. And I mean, it's good, it's bad, it's high, it's low, it's all of it. And I suppose we all are all of it. And but thank you for your kind words. That means a lot to me.
All right. Thank you, Jeffrey. And if people want to have personal questions for you, you have a website, or if they want to, bookings and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, they can go to Envoy Publishing, ENVOY Publishing. The books are there. Some videos are there. There's also a JeffreyCOlsen.com. That's JEFFERY Olsen, OLSEN.com.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for your generous time. We'll talk soon. We'll see each other at Helping Parents Heal, the conference in August. All right. Thank you.
Care, we'll see you.
That was a profound conversation with Jeffrey Olsen. It was moving. It was heartfelt. It was authentic. It was real. And I know it touched on a lot of areas for mental health. You're dealing with trauma, loss, grief. And I just know many people listening to this conversation will be able to benefit from hearing Jeffrey's story and knowing no matter what you're going through, there is a way through. And I think Jeffrey's life and where he is today is a perfect example that no matter what you experience, it is possible to move forward in life and to heal and to grow and to find purpose and meaning, even with the most tragic moments that you experience. And so I thank you for tuning into Jeffrey's conversation. Do check out his wonderful books and all that he has to offer and author. And I'll see you next week on the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder for another wonderful conversation. This is Jacob Cooper signing off here. We'll see you soon, and thank you for tuning in here on the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder podcast.